It's August 7th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with Team Korea's strong presence at the Paris Olympics. The women's table tennis team has managed to reach the semifinals of the competition for the first time in 14 years. Team Korea is eyeing for more medals in the coming days with taekwondo and women's golf competitions starting on Wednesday. Hamas has appointed Yahya Sinwar as its new top chief after his predecessor Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran last week. Sinwar is seen as the architect of the October 7 attacks against Israel, thus public enemy number one in Israel. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has decided on Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, to be her running mate in the presidential election. The former teacher and Army National Guard veteran has now joined the Democratic ticket with one and only mission of defeating Donald Trump. Both the South Korea men's and women's table tennis teams cruised through in the knockout rounds at Paris 2024, entering closer to the medal rounds. Now, Team Korea will be hunting for more medals in taekwondo and women's golf starting Wednesday. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The South Korean women's table tennis team is closing in on a chance to add another medal in the sport for the country. The trio of Shin Yu-bin, Chun Ji-hee, and Lee Eun-hae cruised past Sweden 3-0 in the quarterfinals of the women's team event to advance to the semifinals. However, their next match won't be an easy one. South Korea will play the winner of the quarterfinal match on Wednesday between China and Chinese Taipei, as the top-ranked China is favored to win. China boasts the top 3 singles table tennis players. But even if Team Korea loses in the semifinals, it'll have a chance in the bronze medal match to win its first Team Olympic medal in 16 years. And just like the women's team, the men's team also cruised to the next round, beating Croatia 3-0 in the first knockout round. The trio of Chang Woo-jin, Cho Dae-sung, and Im Jong-hoon defeated Croatia in straight sets, advancing to the quarterfinals. But advancing to the medal rounds will be tougher for the men's team, as they're set to face off against the table tennis powerhouse China in the quarterfinals. Since the men's team event's Olympic debut in 2008, China has won every gold medal so far. Over on the men's 3-meter springboard event, South Korea's Woo Ha-ram and Lee Jae-kyung advanced to the semifinals on Tuesday, with the top 18 divers out of a pool of 25 advancing to the next round. Woo finished 12th, while Lee finished 16th. Woo finished 4th in the event during the last Olympics in Tokyo, the best Olympic performance by a South Korean diver. South Korea will look to add a few more medals over the next few days with taekwondo and women's golf competitions starting on Wednesday. Taekwondo will begin with the lightest weight class at under 58 kilograms, as Park Tae-jun is considered a medal hopeful. Meanwhile, former world number 1 Ko Jin-young and 6-time LPGA Tour winners Kim Hyo-joo and Yang Hee-young will be competing in the women's golf tournament on Wednesday. South Koreans failed to medal in the last Olympics in Tokyo. South Korea currently has 11 gold, 8 silver, and 7 bronze medals in Paris, with the chance to add a few more to their tally. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Over 40 athletes at the Paris Summer Games have tested positive for COVID-19 amid a recent resurgence in virus cases worldwide. According to the World Health Organization's COVID-19 technical lead, Maria van Kerkhove, on Tuesday, French authorities are working to prevent the spread of COVID-19 during the Olympics, with many seen wearing masks at indoor venues. She added that while the COVID-19 infection rate stands at around 10% on average globally, the rate exceeds 20% in Europe. A number of big-name athletes have tested positive, including British swimmer Adam Peaty, who tested positive a day after winning a silver medal in the 100-meter breaststroke. Australia's Alani Pallister pulled out of the women's 1,500-meter freestyle after feeling too ill from her COVID-19 infection. Yahya Sinwar, who was in charge of the October 7th attack, has been picked as the new Hamas leader. Now, this hints the militant group will continue pushing to fight, further raising fears of a wider war in the region. Pinji reports.
Hamas has chosen Yahya Sinwar as its new leader to replace Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in a presumed Israeli strike in Iran. 61-year-old Sinwar is seen by Israel as the mastermind behind the planning and execution of the October 7th attack, when Hamas killed more than 1,000 people and took over 200 others as hostages. Sinwar has not been seen in public since the devastating attacks, defying Israel's attempts to kill him since the start of the war. The appointment of the new Hamas leader comes as Israel braces for a likely attack from Iran and Iranian-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah. Iran has reportedly vowed to carry out a revenge attack against Israel over Haniyeh's killing in Tehran, and Hezbollah also threatened to retaliate in response to the killing of its military commander by Israel last week, without specifying the form or timing of the attack. While Israel remains on alert, the U.S. says it does not believe Iran or Hezbollah has taken retaliatory action against Israel yet, as Washington continues to make efforts to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East.
Last night, I do want to add that while we do not believe the response has started yet, we remain concerned by the increase in violence, including the firing drones by Hezbollah into Israel.
Amid growing fears that the situation could escalate into an all-out regional war, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said ceasefire negotiations have now reached a final stage, and that Washington is working with Egypt and Qatar to finalize an agreement as soon as possible. Pinji, Arirang News.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has picked Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate for the presidential election. Will Harris's bet on Walz be a game changer in her fight against Donald Trump? For more, we're joined by Professor Han Shadol. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Dami. Nice to see you.
Thanks for joining us. Harris's pick was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Now, before we dive into details of this new figure, tell us how crucial is choosing a running mate in the U.S. presidential election?
It's debatable, Dami. Ideally, a running mate for the vice presidency helps compensate for a candidate's liabilities, whether it's a presidential candidate's weakness in a particular part of the country, a particular region, or maybe vulnerability on an issue or an area of expertise. Just a few examples through history quickly. John F. Kennedy chose Lyndon Johnson from Texas, who brought in much of the South, and of course his home state compared to JFK's Massachusetts. And Barack Obama brought in Joe Biden as a running mate. Biden brought a wealth of foreign policy experience and knew Washington like the back of his hand in 2008, whereas Obama was still comparatively young and inexperienced. And Donald Trump in 2016 picked Mike Pence, the Indiana governor, to be his running mate because Pence could bring in evangelical Christian voters, something that Trump was not exactly fit to do in that election. But lackluster running mates sometimes win elections. The first President Bush won with U.S. Senator Dan Quayle, who did little to help the ticket. On the other hand, sometimes candidates that are brought in with the goal of just doing no harm or not overshadowing the top candidate don't work out. Hillary Clinton in 2016, she picked Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, and that didn't work out so well. He turned out to be lackluster and didn't exactly help her. So the question is, what does Tim Walz bring to the ticket with Kamala Harris?
Well, it sounds like a right amount of compatibility plays a crucial role in picking the running mate. Then why do you think Harris eventually chose Walz over Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro? Eventually, she narrowed down to the two figures.
Right. Several factors here. One, people call him a Midwestern dad. Kamala Harris comes across as the fun aunt in this presidential year. Tim Walz might have a different character to play, maybe still quite memeable. He also has been brought forward very much so in social media over the past couple of weeks. He's been calling Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on the Republican side just plain weird. And before Walz started that kind of messaging, the messaging we were seeing from Democrats was more about Trump and Walz Trump and J.D. Vance rather as hazardous, as antithetical to democracy, as too dangerous to put in the White House. Whereas Walz is actually good at bringing a little bit of humor to it. There are several other factors that are interesting as well. Walz comes across on TV in some respects as more of your conventional white male politician, maybe a little bit like Joe Biden was, except he's 22 years younger than Biden. He's the same age as Harris, but he comes across a little bit older than Harris. And then when you get to know him on the issues, he's quite progressive. He will energize, I think, liberal voters and not turn them off. And then the question is Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor. That was the other candidate here who kind of made the final cut in terms of Harris's consideration. Unlike Josh Shapiro, Walz is a little bit more of a blue-collar background. He worked as a high school social studies teacher. He coached football in Minnesota before getting into politics. He has a military background with the U.S. Army National Guard. So there are interesting things that he brings in. One more thing, too. He worked as a member of Congress for Minnesota before taking over as Minnesota's governor in 2019. So he knows the legislative side and the executive side. So even though he's not well known to the U.S. beyond his native Minnesota, let alone the rest of the world, I think he's somebody that could catch on and that could be quite popular in this election and hold up quite well in debates against J.D. Vance.
Right, coming from a pretty diverse background. Now, of course, the announcement came ahead of the 5-day, 7-city tour of the battleground states this week. Professor Shadow, what is it that Harris has to focus from now on?
Well, going forward, both Harris and Walz are going to have to get themselves through the Democratic National Convention, formulate the key positions for the party. They've got probably television debates coming up. The details of those have not yet been finalized, but I think it's a given that we will see debates both for the presidency and the vice presidency. Lots of traveling around the country, too, to try to energize voters. And with that in mind, the first meet and greet they had today was in Pennsylvania, which is very interesting because the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, was, again, as I said, the other top candidate here for the vice presidency. And that's an interesting issue right there. How will Pennsylvania go forward? Will they still turn out for Kamala Harris? Harris may have gambled a bit by not choosing Shapiro because Shapiro is extremely popular in Pennsylvania. He might have made the delivery of electoral votes from Pennsylvania, a very big state, a sure thing. Yet on the other hand, Shapiro had some downsides as well. Former Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who's now in the U.S. Senate, he was openly critical of Shapiro over the past few days. The two of them clashed over the years. And Shapiro also is Jewish. And although he's been critical of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's been supportive of the war against Hamas. And I think if we're looking at this decision that Kamala Harris made, I think she did not want the war in Gaza to loom large or become inflated in the presidential elections. So there were some factors, I think, in that regard that also tilted her toward Walz. And who knows how they'll work out. If it doesn't work out, there'll be a lot of second guessing, I think, later as to whether Shapiro would have been a stronger candidate. But Walz and Harris seem to have jumped in with both feet, and we'll see how things go.
Yeah. And another big event this week was a U.S. stock market tumbling on Monday over fears that the American economy could be sliding into a recession. And of course, Trump really used this collapse as an opportunity to attack Harris, didn't he?
Well, of course. I mean, anytime there's bad news on the economy, the challenger for the presidency, in this case, Trump, will attack those in office. But there are some interesting factors here. I mean, one, the stock market in the U.S. has been very overheated all year. The excitement over artificial intelligence related companies has been somewhat overdone. And I think maybe reality is beginning to catch up to that. The other factor, a little bit more structural with the economy, the pandemic supply chain disruption that we saw over the last few years, and also the labor market shortages that kind of emerged from the pandemic. This is all still unwinding, but we may be getting back to something closer to normal in the economy. It's also interesting that the latest run-up in the stock market, the rally that just got snapped over the last couple of weeks, that rally coincided in its later stages, especially with the period in which Donald Trump was seen as much more likely to win the presidential election. This was after President Joe Biden's very weak debate performance in June and all the uncertainty that followed that. Once Biden made it clear he wouldn't run for re-election, once he did that about face, and he was out, and then Kamala Harris emerged, and she became quite strong as a candidate right away. A lot of relief in the U.S. that now there was an alternative, not just to Trump, but both Biden and Trump, with Harris maybe now poised as quite a bit more likely to win. I think that is also having an effect on the stock market. Some of that rally was pricing in the prospect of a Trump victory in 2024, and that victory is much less certain now for Trump than it was a few weeks ago.
All right, Professor Shadow, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Rhode Island this morning. You enjoy your evening there.
Thank you for having me, Dami. Hope you enjoy your day. Take care.
The U.S. is to award SK hynix $450 million in grant to help the tech giant build an advanced packaging plant in Indiana. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, a preliminary memorandum of terms has been signed with SK hynix to provide $450 million worth of direct funding and access to $500 million in government loans based on the U.S. CHIPS and Science Act. Washington is also to grant a 25% tax credit for the tech giant's investments in the country. SK hynix announced back in April that it would invest a little less than $4 billion to build an advanced chip production facility to produce next-generation memory chips in the U.S. state. With a growing global interest in Korean culture, more and more people are looking to learn the Korean language. Educators who are meeting this demand in various parts of the world have gathered here in Seoul to share their experiences. Our culture correspondent Song Yujin tells us more.
When Bai Maganbetova Dilbar first started learning Korean 10 years ago, she never imagined where it would take her. A former student at the King Sejong Institute in Kazakhstan, she was drawn to the beauty of the language and now teaches at the very place where she picked it up. Now, she has become the first foreign national to win the grand prize, the highest honor at the World Korean Educator Conference's Outstanding Educator Award.
한국어는 제 일이고, 제 과거이고, 그리고 현재이고, 제 미래이라고 생각합니다. 네, 앞으로도 한국어를 더 열심히 공부하고 학생들에게 한국어를 더 재미있게 가르칠 수 있는 그런 선생님이 되고 싶습니다.
Every summer, hundreds of Korean language instructors from around the world gather in Korea for this conference.
The World Korean Educator Conference is a platform to honor teachers from King Sejong Institutes worldwide who work to spread the Korean language and Korean culture. It also provides training to enhance their teaching skills.
The King Sejong Institute, run by the King Sejong Institute Foundation under the Culture Ministry, is dedicated to teaching Korean language and culture to non-native speakers. With over 250 branches in more than 80 countries, the institute has seen a surge in students eager to learn Korean. This growing interest makes discovering the most effective teaching strategies crucial. Bai Maganbetova wanted to make what she found challenging when learning Korean easier, so she decided to add a fun twist.
수업 시간에 조금 약간 5분, 10분 정도 게임을 하고 학생들에게 그렇게 어휘나 문법을 설명하거나 연습을 합니다.
Until Friday, these passionate instructors will learn and practice the latest techniques, including integrating the latest technology and trends like short-form content. One of the participants, Zanabek Begimai, was the first student of the King Sejong Institute in Kyrgyzstan, where she teaches now.
한국어를 가르쳐주신 선생님들의 방식대로 제가 배운 것 그대로 그냥 가르치고 있는 것 같아요. 뭐 수업 중에 뭐 한국 관련 뭐 동영상 보여주거나 아니면 뭐 드라마 같은 거 조금씩 보여주고 아니면 그 노래들 있잖아요. 애기들이童謡.
The theme of this year's World Korean Educator Conference is Teaching Korean is a Wonderful Thing. Through this, participants will explore how to make learning Korean a truly wonderful experience for their students. 송유진, Arirang News.
Good morning. I'm Kim Si-young, and this is The World Now. We begin today in the US, where a Chinese academic has been convicted of illegally acting as a foreign agent for Beijing. Following a week-long trial in Brooklyn Federal Court, a jury found 75-year-old Wang Shujun guilty on all 4 counts in an indictment, which includes acting and conspiring to act as an agent of a foreign government without prior notification to the U.S. Attorney General, criminal use of identification, and also making false statements to law enforcement. Assistant Attorney General Matthew G. Olson of the Justice Department's National Security Division said that the defendant infiltrated a New York-based advocacy group masquerading as a pro-democracy activist, all while covertly collecting and reporting sensitive information and sharing his findings with 4 spy officials of China's Ministry of State Security. Wang emigrated to America in 1994 and is a naturalized U.S. citizen. He was arrested in March 2022 and is scheduled to be sentenced on January 9, 2025, facing up to 25 years in prison. Violent far-right protests and riots that spread across a number of towns and cities in the UK over the space of a week have seen more than 400 people arrested and 100 of them charged. Now, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that sufficient police will be on the streets to handle the upcoming protests.
That we do have adequate police in place, that we are able to cope with this disorder. But the message has to go to those who are involving themselves in this disorder, which is you're wrong, you shouldn't be doing it, and you will feel the full force of the law, as I hope we've been able to demonstrate with these swift prosecutions.
Protests first erupted the night after 3 children were killed in the Southport stabbing attacks after false rumours circulated that the suspect was a Muslim asylum seeker. Prime Minister Starmer has condemned the riots as far-right thuggery and on Monday said that he vows to ramp up criminal justice to deal with the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant riots. Starmer added that the fact that protests were being held in multiple different locations has made it more difficult for the police to react. Climate activists released a video on Tuesday showing them spraying footballer Lionel Messi's Ibiza mansion with red and black paint. Before vandalizing the white facade of the famed Argentinian footballer's house on Spain's Ibiza island, 2 members of the Futuro Vegetal group stood in front of the mansion, holding a banner that said, "Help the planet, eat the rich, abolish the police." In a statement, the group claimed the mansion near Calatarida Cove was an illegal construction, saying that they aim to exhibit the responsibility of the rich for the climate crisis. Messi, who currently plays for Inter Miami in the US, bought the house in 2022 for around $12 million. A Chinese-American teenager is vying to set a record as the youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents to raise donations for research into childhood cancer. 19-year-old Ethan Guo plans to cover 50,000 miles over 100 days with stops in 60 countries in his bid to raise up to $1 million. Guo began his journey in May in Memphis, Tennessee, US, and has so far visited 7 countries while making multiple overnight stops to get to Switzerland, Geneva on Tuesday. Guo has now jetted off towards Heraklion in Greece. Guo started learning to fly at 13 years old and received his pilot's license at 17.
Good morning. Intense heat continues to blanket Korea on this Ipchu, the onset of autumn based on the seasonal calendar. A heat wave warning remains in place in most parts. While Gyeongju in Gyeongsang-Pukto province was one of the hottest places yesterday, with temperatures going above 37 degrees Celsius. It will be as hot as yesterday with sudden downpours in the forecast. Due to the atmospheric instability, we are seeing frequent heavy rain. Through tonight, we need to brace for up to 60 millimeters of showers. Gyeongsang-Pukto province in particular will need to prepare for buckets of rain. Also, those having summer vacation near the water need to be mindful of sudden rain during the day today. Temperatures should go up as high as yesterday at 33 degrees here in the capital, Daejeon topping out at 35 degrees Celsius. The sweltering heat shows no sign of easing up through next week. Take good care. Many seem to be coming down with summer colds. Stay nourished and hydrated. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time.